Good morning and welcome to Rising. Unfortunately, we have to open with some grim news today. Briahna, why don't you fill the audience in on the situation at Michigan State University?
Well, a gunman opened fire in an academic hall at Michigan State on Monday night, injuring 5 people and killing 3 others. Officials confirmed that the suspect, a 43-year-old Anthony McRae, died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had no known ties to the university. News Nation's Ashley Banfield spoke to a few students who were hunkered down in a dorm room before officials confirmed the gunman had died. Here's a little of their exchange.
We were up actually in the North neighborhood around the Union, and we had planned to go eat there, but made a last-minute decision just cause to go to the Snyder Phillip dining hall. And as we get to the Snyder Phillips dining hall, we're eating. About 10 minutes in, we start getting texts. We see there's a shooting. We're getting alerts. Everyone's somewhat panicking, but no one knows if it's true yet.
Authorities are trying to get to the bottom of why McRae targeted the university. Surveillance footage showed him late Monday near campus grounds. Now the Detroit News reports this morning that McRae was sentenced to 18 months in state prison in November 2019 after being convicted of possessing a loaded firearm in a vehicle. He was released from supervision in May of 2021. And I'm reading in the Detroit News that police have been called to his house before because of the sounds of gunshots from some kind of target practice going on. So, we don't, it's too early to make much of this yet, other than it's a very sad situation. Not obvious why he might have targeted the university or, what is going on here. Someone who has served prison time for felony gun possession should not be able to procure a firearm subsequently. So if police were called to his home subsequently and saw that he had a gun or was using a gun, he should have been rearrested. So we'll have to see whether this is another one of those cases where the suspect was known to law enforcement to an extent that should have actually prompted some earlier action before it came to this. Obviously, I don't want to condemn before knowing more, but that has been a pattern in many of these mass shooting cases. Yeah,
I mean, some people might disagree with you. I mean, folks feel very strongly about gun ownership being a really fundamental right. Most other rights, just because you break the law, don't necessarily strip you of those rights. And I'm sure there are many gun owners who would argue that, he was arrested, he served his time for, I presume, having a loaded vehicle that was not legal in his firearm. Presumably that's why he was arrested and he got out. Maybe he should be allowed to, maybe that was a mistake. Maybe he can, be licensed to buy a gun again. It's not clear how he procured this gun, whether it was legally or illegally. All of those details will come out, and I'm sure they will shape the narrative around what can be done to prevent tragedies like this. But again, it's hard to get around the effects of having such a prevalence of guns in the culture. Even if you think it's a net good, ultimately other countries are not having these kind of situations in such a recurrent fashion. I mean, somebody noted that in one of the crowd shots of the kids on campus, one of the kids was wearing a T-shirt indicating that they had survived a shooting at their high school. And now here they are, I guess only a few years later in college, having to endure the same kind of experience. So I would like to say that this is one of those moments that will really make us sit back and take a really hard look at what we're doing and how we're structuring society and why people feel so disaffected or whatever it is that's driving them to these things and how they're able to get access to the means to create these kinds of tragedies. But we've had so many of them before. You and I have sat here at this table discussing so many of these events. I'm a little skeptical about any given event being a tipping point of any sort.
Yeah, it's terrible. I have a connection to Michigan State University. My brother went there. My sister-in-law went there. Both my parents went there. So it's, it jars you, especially when you know the campus is known to you. You know people who did live there. So and now I feel strongly about Second Amendment rights, gun rights. I do not personally feel strongly about people convicted of gun crimes still being able to have access to guns. I don't know if that makes me an outlier or if that's atypical for how supporters of the Second Amendment feel about this, but I would have no problem restricting.
Does the nature of the crime, do you think, matter? Obviously, I would say someone who kills somebody or threatens someone, holds somebody hostage, things like that, using a gun.
I think if the crime involves a gun.
It's interesting. I mean, there are people who get cited for violations for shooting guns in areas they're not supposed to, hunting violations, having the car, like this person loaded when it apparently wasn't supposed to be loaded by the rules in his car. You know, the kind of violations that are very serious, in the same way that certain driving violations are very serious, because you can take somebody's life very easily with these machines, but doesn't necessarily mean you're never allowed to drive again once you've served your time, for instance.
Whoa.
I'm not making a case for this, by the way. I'm just.
Well, right, because I mean, if people support greater restrictions on firearms, or think our society would be safer if there were more restrictions on firearms, wouldn't the first step be enforcing those restrictions against people who have committed some crime involving a firearm?
I completely follow the logic. I guess I'm just asking whether or not the nature of the violation matters, because you can imagine all kind of fairly de minimis violations. That guns are serious, but so is driving drunk, so is driving recklessly. Cars are also serious. So you can imagine a kind of de minimis violation that doesn't necessarily, many people would argue, doesn't necessarily mean you should never be able to own a gun again. And I guess what I'm trying to get at the bottom of is, I think that sometimes when we're faced with a tragedy like this, we think, well, the issue is just that the wrong person, you know, we should be able to predict who the right and wrong people are based on past behavior, whether or not they've been, you know, flagged by a red flag law, whether or not they've been in the criminal justice system before. But, you know, I don't think that certain gun rights advocates are wrong when they say, having been in the system for whatever reason doesn't mean you shouldn't be allowed to access guns or have various rights. And shouldn't it be more closely, you know, narrowly tailored to actually get to the bottom of it? And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, whether or not the race of the victim affects how the dialogue is, and whether gun rights owners come to this person's defense, or whether or not the nature of the tragedy means that nobody comes to this person's defense. You know, it'll be interesting to see, because 18. I mean, this doesn't seem to be a situation where someone was let out early. This was not a case where we could talk about this as a bail reform issue. It seems like he served his 18 months in prison. He got out. Isn't what we believe is that people they paid their time, they for the crime, and.
But then I don't understand. Like, I want to support, protect the right of law-abiding citizens, most of whom handle firearms responsibly, to do so, and then people on the other side of the issue say, well, it's dangerous. We have too many guns. Look at our country has a problem with guns that other countries don't. I accept all that. Like, okay, maybe we can meet in the middle in enforcing restrictions on guns for people who have had run-ins with the law, specifically involving guns. Seems like if we're going to enforce broad gun control anyway, that's also going to involve enforcing it against people who have had incidents with guns. So why wouldn't we start
Robby,
there, I would say?
I guess I'm just pushing back on this idea of incidents with guns. So, for example, there are states, you know, sometimes you're allowed to drive with a loaded gun in your car. Sometimes you're not. Like, there's state-by-state laws.
I'm sure there are BS convictions over exactly what you
that's
said.
Just what I'm saying. So now, in retrospect, obviously, I think any of us would want for police to have intervened no matter what if it was going to prevent this kind of a tragedy. But a priori, from like a civil libertarian perspective, you know, how do you predict what is an overreach in saying someone who maybe forgot to unload their gun coming home from the shooting range and went to jail for it should never own a gun again? You know, is that a world we actually want to live in? I mean, you know, to be clear, I'm a progressive, so I have all kinds of different thoughts and feelings about how I would structure gun laws, but I'm just saying from the perspective of many people who are engaged in this debate and want there to be more expansive freedoms with respect to guns.
Right, I would see that as an argument for having no restrictions on guns in any case.
So he would never have been arrested in the first place if there hadn't been a law preventing him from driving loaded. So then in that case, he never would have been flagged by anything, and there would have been no opportunity for intervention. I'm saying
that doesn't sound like, to me, what people who support gun control actually want. They want restrictions on the guns.
I mean, yes, they
So they need to be enforced. If they're not being enforced at all, then it's not, what's the point?
What's the law? What's the law that you think? I mean, so first of all, neither of us know, I'm sorry, this is difficult, but neither of us know whether or not it was illegal for him to have. We don't know how he got this gun, whether it was a legally purchased gun, whether it was an illegally obtained gun, whether it was his gun, whether or not once you're convicted for what he was convicted of, driving with a loaded gun, you are precluded actually from getting a gun again, and then whether we think as a society you should be precluded for that kind of a gun-related crime. These are all, I think, relevant.
My understanding is you generally are precluded. Maybe it varies state to state, et cetera. I'm sure it varies to some degree state to state, but my understanding is you're generally precluded from owning a firearm subsequently to...
Any felony, or
I don't know if
just
it's any felony or
gun-related?
It's probably not any. It might be any felony. It must vary. Interesting. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, lots more to learn about this situation.
For sure. And I look forward to hearing about what's on your radar coming up next, Robby.